Welcome to Roundtail Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about. We talk about faith. Hey, Ed.
Hey, Leslie.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
It's almost Christmas.
It's almost Christmas.
Which is wild.
Yep.
Although in our house, it has been Christmas for many months, if you judge by how often we watch The Grinch and Elmo's Nutcracker.
Oh, perfect.
Which is pretty cute. So,
Yeah.
Which is to say, once a week for about, 60 weeks now? But who's counting? It's fine. Everything's great.
Building anticipation.
It could be so much worse.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So we're diving in. It is week 4 of our 52 for the journey. We are diving into a reading from Luke chapter 1, verses 46 through 56, and another KJV moment.
Yep, King James Version.
I feel like you went very traditional with our Christmas time.
I did. Yeah, these are old authorized translations from the authorized Bible, as it has been called. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Yep.
All right, here we go. And Mary said, I love how many ands KJV always has.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, and Mary said, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. For he hath regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. For he that is mighty hath done to me great things, and holy is his name. And his mercy is on them that fear him from generation to generation. He hath showed strength with his arm. He hath scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He hath put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent empty away. He hath helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, as he spake to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his seed forever. And Mary abode with her for about 3 months and returned to her own house. So Mary abode with her, meaning her being Elizabeth.
Correct.
Yep. I did a little context reading before you came down to the studio today, be like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Because
who is the her?
Who's the her? And also, so I worked in the Episcopal Church for 4 years, and then also have been Episcopal adjacent for many. And so this reading is what's lovingly known as the Magnificat, the text of which is sung at evensongs in the Episcopal Church and Church of England and all those wonderful things. So it's set to music a lot. So I associate it very much with singing. While I was reading, I was hearing different phrases from different versions of the Magnificat.
Yeah.
Over the years that I've heard. So they kind of like pop in little great moments as I'm reading. It was a very multi-sensory experience happening just then.
That's great.
It's fun.
Yeah. There's a sound associated with the text for you, it sounds like.
There is. There's also, just to pop in the joke early. So you knew my cat Pandora. I had another cat for a while whose name was Maggie, short for Magnificat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I always enjoyed that very much. We called her Maggie for short. It was pretty cute. So the Magnificat. And I also was very interested. I was reading, again, around it. And I wanted to, I'll just jump in early with sort of an observation. So the next section is when Elizabeth has her baby, right? And her husband, Zechariah, right? I didn't know, I guess, was not verbal.
Lost his speech for a time.
And so, and she was told that she was supposed to name her son John, as if Mary was told to name her son Jesus.
Yep.
And so Elizabeth has her baby, and everyone goes, well, you're going to name Zechariah, right? Because that's the father's name. That's what you do. That's what's done in this family, in this community, in this culture.
Yep.
She's like, no, his name's John.
Yep.
And everybody goes, oh, what? Oh, like clutch pearls, right? And then Zechariah grabs a tablet and says, his name is John, and writes down his name is John.
Right.
And then Zechariah can speak again. Everyone's aghast that the father would dare give up this honor of being. I had never heard that story before until about 20 minutes ago. So
It's a great story.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Another visitation, right? He gets a visitation and it basically renders him speechless.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't say much for the story.
Yeah. He's around.
He's in the background.
Yeah. Well, it's these stories, this section is sort of elevating the women, the Mary and Elizabeth dynamic there.
Yep. Powerfully so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about when you think about going back to our original reading? What do you think about when you read it?
Well, there's two things that come to mind. As we mentioned in another discussion recently, that Mary is not asked for her permission, right? But she gives it.
She does.
Right. So I love the fact that the storyteller goes out of that person's way to say that this is something she claims a certain authority for herself. She doesn't wait for it to be granted to her. And that's another way in which the Bible is kind of undermining the prevailing culture of the time, right? The biblical stories are doing that. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, for somebody who started off, as the story says, being troubled by the news,
right?
When she finds her voice, wow, she really, she really makes good use of it.
I love this so much because what happens before this story, before this sort of monologue, if you will, this outpouring from her is she's journeying. She's been on a journey to see Elizabeth. And I'm just picturing Mary just thinking, grappling, like the experience of like, I'm having a baby, first of all. And then there's all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Like having a baby is life-changing enough, mind-changing enough, world-changing enough. And then, oh, by the way, this child is supposed to, I don't know, save the world. No pressure.
Speaking of world-changing.
Yeah. And so it's like pressure upon expectations and pressure. And, you're not going to follow the familial expectation of who they're telling you to name him.
Right.
God has named this child, which is unto itself a little, I kind of want to know what Mary would have named him if she had her own way.
Yeah. You shall call his name is kind of the word that comes down.
Yeah. So, and just picturing her and then like, I wish I could, I feel like a really good playwright or storyteller would write us a play about that journey and like her internal process and her own mental journey and her own like from she gave her verbal acceptance, she gave her verbal consent, but something tells me that wasn't the end of the like the what
right
of it all. And so I really think that would be such an interesting thing to look at. And then she gets to Elizabeth and Elizabeth is like, you are blessed, and oh my goodness, and John in utero recognizes Jesus in utero and is like, hey brother,
right. Howdy, cousin.
Hi. And that's, and so Elizabeth recognizes this blessing that's been given to Mary, and Mary recognizes the blessing that's been given to Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And then she gives us this sort of speech.
Oh, yeah. It's a statement of faith.
Yeah. And I'm sort of picturing her like practicing and being like, well, I thought about this. I'm thinking about this. And then it just kind of outpours from her.
Yeah.
Well,
just jumping a little bit further down the road, she does come to a point where, she gets the word that this child is going to be set, I think the language is, for the rise and fall of many. So it's a sense that his life there's a turbulence around his life. Not everybody's going to be appreciating him. And he's not going to make everybody happy. Right. So, and then it says, Mary pondered all these things in her heart. So she doesn't really, in the early stages of it's all rapid. It's one thing happens after the next. She hears all this news. She goes to be with Elizabeth. She gives this speech and this, very amazing statement of faith. It's only actually down the road a little bit that it's sort of hits her. And I think that's true to life in a way. This news that she gets, it's troubling, but it's also she recognizes it's put her in a very different place, as she says, right? For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. Right. This is not a person who has a low estimation of herself at this point.
She kind of she sees it for what it is.
And that future, that her legacy, she's a very young person, presumably at this point, and she's already thinking about her legacy, right? She recognizes that. But again, a little further down the road, it will say she ponders these things in her heart. And you get the sense that the pondering is not all positive. You know, she's aware that this is going to be a very tumultuous journey that's just starting out.
Well, because the political landscape of which Jesus is being born into is complicated. It's very authoritarian. And so this King of Kings that she's supposed to be giving birth to is like, well, that's gonna cause some problems.
Yeah, because culturally there are all the cultural expectations she's fighting against,
right?
You know, in terms of being a woman at that time in that culture. However, this is a Roman occupied country, right? So this is a country in which Rome has appointed leaders to govern in its stead. Nobody cares about Mary. She couldn't be farther from the center of power. And yet this is where God is operating. This is also a time, you know, so the good news that's being brought into the world through Jesus, as the stories say, right? This is good news. That word, good news in Greek, euangelion, is also used about the birth of the empire that's happening at the same time. So Caesar Augustus. So there are competing kings right from the get-go. And, you know, her language that she uses, it's not exactly a language that one would use to galvanize unity. It's more about provoking some division, because she says, you know, he hath put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. So whatever God's got in mind about what the world is supposed to look like, it's not what the world looked like through Mary's eyes initially, right? He hath filled the hungry with good things. That sounds great. And the rich he hath sent empty away. So she, in her words, she's imagining a big reversal that's going to happen. And people who've had nothing are now going to be at the top of the pecking order. So it's really interesting that not only do we get a lot of great language from her, but the language itself is contentious, you know, and I think that's interesting that that's there.
She sees that the world has the potential to be turned on its head. You know, everything they thought they knew is going to just completely flip around.
Yep.
So we know, you know, the famous birth story of Jesus, the most humble of birth stories, right? What do we know about sort of Mary and Joseph and their earlier days? Like, was Mary from a sort of middle class family? Like, what was her sort of do we know anything about sort of her general?
Well, there's no middle class.
Okay.
You know?
Well, sure.
So you've got this tiny sliver of the population that are the super wealthy, especially in the Roman Empire. And then you have a lot of people who are scraping by, you know, their existence. And so it's presumed, we don't know anything about Mary.
Okay.
You know, we don't really know anything about Joseph, except that he's acknowledged as having been through the lineage of the house of David, right? So Jesus is supposed to be able to trace his ancestry back to David, another king, but he's going to be a new kind of king, right? He's going to be a new kind of Moses. So all of that gets entered in here as well. So yeah, not much that we recognize at all, except that it's highly likely that these are people who are maybe not living subsistence lives, but not maybe much better than that either.
Okay. Yeah.
No power really to speak of or anything. And Joseph's really not, you know, where is he?
Yeah.
He's not.
Yeah.
You know, he has a much bigger role to play in Matthew's gospel. Okay. And it's in Matthew's gospel that he'll try to separate himself from Mary, divorce her quietly is the language. But he's also the one who saves them. You know, so he actually takes them out of the country and then brings them back when things quiet down a little bit. So, but in this story, he's not really around very much.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And you know, this story will jump. You know, I always think it's so odd because the story of Jesus, we celebrate his birth, and then a couple of weeks later, he's a teenager. So there's a big gap there.
Right.
But this story, the Gospel according to Luke, actually includes a story of Jesus as a teenager, as an adolescent. And he winds up staying behind in Jerusalem. The family brings him for a dedication ceremony, but he stays back.
Oh, interesting.
And so they have to go back and get him because someone says, I haven't seen Jesus around for a while. So they go back. But you already get the sense he's off doing his own thing. And that's what really makes Mary ponder these things in her heart. Like, who is this child?
This is very different.
So there we go. But actually, she's given kind of an indication from her own, words, right? To the ears of God, she has said, this is the way God's operating now.
I'm sorry. I'm picturing something very funny in my head, and I have to share it with you. That I'm picturing Mary trying to raise a young Jesus, and they're like at the lake or at the water, and he just goes running off across the water.
There you go.
Because homie can walk on water, and she's like, "Oh, for crying out loud!"
There are a lot of cartoons out there.
Right. Yeah. I'm just picturing trying to raise a child who is, they say gifted children are difficult to raise.
Right.
Imagine trying to raise one with miracle powers.
Well, these miracle powers, they were included in some of the other gospel accounts of Jesus that didn't make it into the New Testament.
Really? Tell me more.
And one of the great ones is that Joseph and Jesus are working in the carpenter's shop, and there's a board that doesn't really quite fit, so Jesus just lengthens it. So, I mean, that's the kind of story that didn't make it into the New Testament, but I think there were some people playing with this idea of, okay.
That's amazing, and I want to be able to
there's
do that.
There's some, and I can't remember some of the others at this time, but there are a few of them. And the fact that they were out there, that people were describing him this way.
Yeah.
Just goes to show they were thinking along these lines as well.
There was some humor involved. I love that. That sounds so. I always was fascinated by these books and stories that didn't make it in. It sort of feels like the cut scenes from a movie.
Yeah.
That sometimes you're like, oh, that would have been so good.
And you just wonder, in the minds of people who were writing these stories. So first of all, they include this, which is actually, dangerous stuff. Right? This is
subversive.
We have to remember that when we hear the word Lord associated with Jesus, and that just rolls right over us because we've heard it so many times.
Sure.
To call someone Lord 2,000 years ago, when you already have an emperor in the land, no land supports two emperors,
right?
Two kings,
right?
And so it's already intended to be subversive language.
Yeah.
So all of that's already taking place here, in the language that's associated with Mary. It's funny because I've heard preachers over the years say that, the Magnificat is supposed to be like Mary's lullaby to Jesus, and he's already being raised. It's like she's singing to him, if I had a hammer, that old folk song. And that in other words, he's being raised in the embrace of a woman who gets it. Right. She already embodies the message. And she gets that from her understanding of what matters to God. And I hadn't really noticed it, but as you were reading it in the beginning of this, it'd be interesting to match it up with other translations. But, when she describes God, she says, he hath showed strength. He hath put down the mighty. He hath filled the hungry. He hath helped his servant Israel. She's saying, this is God. This is not me thinking about this. Right. Because she puts a lot of herself into this too.
Yeah.
But she is saying, this is God who's acting. So if this is how God is acting, then we already have our mandate. This isn't like something that I came up with on my own while I was out for a walk, right? You can connect all of those sentences with passages from what we would call the Old Testament or the Hebrew prophets, right? So it's all connected, it's all consistent, and it's all pretty kind of subversive. It's meant to overturn a world order that is not helpful to people who are scrapping for their existence, and it's meant to put an end to that. So that's something that she draws into the story. I just think it's beautiful, the way that she is the person who is like the first, she's like the pioneer, just getting this message now and then relaying it to other people. So that's kind of how I was so impressed just as you were reading it to see how many times she's emphasizing the action of God. God is alive and at large. We may not know how,
Yeah.
right? We can't always figure that out. It's a mystery, but it's happening. So now how do I organize my life around that?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It seems like an act of just complete
Yeah,
faithfulness.
I would agree. Yeah, she is making affirming statements, based on trust.
Yeah.
And that's it. My simplistic take of the Bible basically is that, if people are looking for arguments about the existence of God, they're not going to really find that in the Bible. The Bible assumes that God exists. And then it may question, what in the world is God up to? I don't get it. Why are we still suffering? Why are we, why isn't this dream of this new world come? You'll get a lot of that, but it's not really questioning the aliveness of God or the fact that God is somehow at large in the spirit. And that is, and I think Mary's Magnificat is a perfect example of it. She's saying, this is who God is. She's not saying, I wonder if God was part of this. There's we tend to be very, we're always kind of open-ended in our questioning. Could it have been God? Was it something else? But not for these people. And so I think that's interesting because that's their starting point. And they don't bring that same level maybe of skepticism or cynicism, that the modern world is increasingly bringing to these stories.
That's really interesting. I love that they just start from a place of, well, yes.
God.
And.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't know a lot about God, but, a lot of people have been figuring this out over the years and writing about it. And so it's like I read this one line once. It was somebody was asking the question, what is prayer? And the answer was, God is prayer.
Oh.
And I'm still puzzling that over.
What does that mean?
I think it's an amazing statement, and I'm not sure.
Okay.
Except that, it's as if when you mention the name, when you think about that God is in a sense the context for everything that we are. Okay. We tend to sort of personify God and place God somewhere. In these stories, God is the whole context. God is all of it. And so we're living and moving and breathing in that air, in that spirit. And so that's the basis. That's the foundation. And then everything follows from there.
Yeah.
So it's to say God is prayer is to say that when you recognize that context, you're already praying. It's like it's already happening.
It's already in here.
And there's a great little passage in the New Testament in one of Paul's letters where he says the Spirit prays for us, even in a sense when we're not aware of it, it's already praying in us. That's already happening. So yes, it's wonderful to be conscious of that, but it's also wonderful to be conscious of the fact that it's happening when we don't know about it.
Right.
Right, or aren't aware of it.
Yeah.
So
I think that's really interesting. It made me think about how scientists are always grappling at what's between. Right? We have the atoms and then there's the strings. And
right.
What's between
What's the
all
connectivity there?
Yeah, because nothing is ever perfectly up against each other. So
right.
I like to think that's sort of where God is.
I love that.
Sort of everywhere, just filling in the gaps.
Did we mention at one point, I think it might have come up recently, but there was an author, John Taylor, who wrote a book called The Go-Between God.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And his take on this is the most important word in the English language, and I think he would say spiritually speaking, is the word and.
I love that.
And that's that betweenness you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's the and.
The and.
What is in that and? Well, I think physicists are still trying to figure that out.
That's so funny.
It seems like this is all still very much a matter of their growing understanding about how the world is, right? So his thought was, there's where God is. God is connecting everything. We may live in the world as if that's not true, as if we're actually, it's more like but rather than and. But that is not really the reality.
Interesting.
And when people over the years have said to me, as they often have for some reason, Ed, let me tell you what's real.
In the real world.
In the real world, this is how it is. Let me give you the reality, because apparently I didn't understand that.
Okay.
and I needed to be brought up to speed.
Oh, so generous.
Yeah, exactly. And it's nice to be, tuned in finally instead of tuned out. So my thought is that when people usually say that, the next thing that's coming is it's a description of division or antagonism or contentiousness, right?
Worse
That's how
than
the
you
world
think.
is.
Yeah.
That's what people are saying.
Sure.
These texts are saying, as you just did, that wait a second. No, it's actually all connected. We may pretend that it's not, but that's not the real reality. Mm-hmm. And I really love that because this sort of suggests we're already living in a depolarized world. Right. We may think that that's why it becomes a slight source of irritation to me when I hear people say that, the world is very polarized. Not really. Yeah. Not really. There is a way in which we make it so, view it as such, but the underlying reality, I think, according to these stories, right, is that in fact it's connected.
Well, and let it be said that the polar opposites of a magnet are what attract each other.
There you go.
And that's what connect.
I rest my case.
There you go. It's solved. And I also think too, there's something about, the way you think is the way you are. And if you're like, the world is this.
Yeah.
That means you are acting from a place as if it is this. Mm-hmm. And therefore your world is more like that.
Yep.
Right. Versus being the and.
Yes. And, C.S. Lewis once said, if you can't believe, so in other words, if you can't believe that and, then make believe.
Oh, there you go. Fake it till you make it.
Right.
I like that.
And so, just get yourself in the habit of thinking that what is described as reality through the words of people like Mary, let that be that. Maybe you think, I'm not sure I can believe that right now.
Yeah.
Make believe and grow into it over time. Because the things that she's saying, they're fairly dramatic.
It's a lot.
Right. It's a lot. And the reason I think we've been singing about it probably, for as many years as we have been, is the singing can also get at a deeper or different level maybe than we can if we just, read it over and over and over or preach on it, right?
Yeah.
There's something about the music and the sound of the sung voice that helps us to get it into ourselves.
Well, it apparently lights up more part of the brain than spoken word.
As
I've been reading Music in Mind as edited by Renee Fleming.
Okay.
I've been learning so much.
See?
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I have to end our podcast with a little mea culpa.
Go for it.
This will be I think this was bad. This is bad as like a podcast producer kind of thing.
Go for it.
Our 200th episode was like 3 episodes ago.
Oh. Yay.
So congratulations.
Yay.
200 episodes, everybody.
200.
And onward.
Oh my heavens. Mea culpa forgiven.
Yeah,
Come on.
thank you. I was like, that happened because I was uploading it. I was actually uploading the 201st, and I was like, whoops.
Wow.
Oops. Oh, well. Onward and upward.
Onward.
We'll get 250. It'll be fine.
Exactly.
Next year.
We'll make up for it.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We will be off next week for Christmas. We'll be back. Have we decided, are we doing a new year? We're thinking about it. We'll see you in 1 or 2 weeks. Let's be honest, it's probably been 2 weeks. It's fine. You guys all should be enjoying your relaxation. Hopefully you get some time for yourselves and those you love. And we will see you back here in a couple weeks. Roundhill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Roundhill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.